Katrina Lewis. I'm the Operations Manager of the Orwell Prize. It's wonderful to be here for the second year at Letchworth George Orwell Festival. And we're here with a very starry, sparkling panel tonight to discuss poverty then and now, Orwell and his successors. So I'm going to introduce the panel, of which now you'll see why it's very fitting that Stephen has that book. And then I'm going to introduce the night. We'll introduce the panellists and we'll have a bit of debate between us, and then we will open it to the floor so we can hear your questions as well. So tonight we have Stephen Armstrong. Stephen Armstrong tread Orwell's steps in Road to Wigan Pier, 75 years after he first wrote it, and wrote a book called The Road to Wigan Pier Revisited, looking at Wigan today. We have Gwenton Slowly, who is a real-life character from a book that was shortlisted for this year's Orwell Prize, Hood Rat, by Gavin Knight. But more than that, Gwenton has written his own book. He's a former gang member who is now working with Scotland Yard, and his book, which is available also, is From the Streets to Scotland Yard, and he has some real expertise in the area that we're talking about tonight. Jacqueline Crooks is the director of Befriend a Family, who work with children living in poverty within Westminster, doing some very important work, and she herself is a writer, so she comes at it, who grew up in London, and she comes at this from many angles. Dr. Michael Seyu replaced Peter Davidson on the Board of Trustees for the Orwell Archive at UCL. He's a lecturer of English whose own work includes an examination of the everyday in modern literature. So, why are we here today? Well, the PEG is the 75th anniversary of Road to Wigan Pier, Orwell's classic piece of reportage. I think it's referred to in Bernard Crick's biography as the vital journey, the epic, important journey that he did, which was sort of at a time of writers going up to the north like documentarists today, and writing sort of documentaries on what's happening in the north of England. Along with J.D. Priestley. Off he went to see what was going on, and to give you a taste of that, I'm going to read a very brief, because I'm aware of the time, a brief extract of his sight in the mines, which I think is one of the most powerful parts of it. When you go down a coal mine, it is important to try and get to the coal face when the fillers are at work. This is not easy because when the mine is working, visitors are a nuisance and are not encouraged. But if you go at any other time, it is possible to come away with the totally wrong impression. On a Sunday, for instance, a mine seems almost peaceful. The time to go there is when the machines are roaring and the air is black with coal dust, and when you can actually see what the miners have to do. At those times, the place is like hell, or at any rate, like my own mental picture of hell. Most of the things one imagines in hell are there. Heat, noise, confusion, darkness, foul air, and above all, unbearably cramped space. Everything except the fire, for there is no fire down there, except the feeble beams of daily lamps and electric torches which scarcely penetrate the clouds of coal dust. Of course, this isn't what Stephen saw when he went to Wigan this time. Things have changed a lot, but how much has life changed? That's what we're here to talk about today. So I've got a few questions to start us off. Orwell said the poor are always with us, but has the nature of poverty in our society changed? Has the distribution of poverty changed? Are different people poor in different ways? Is it really poverty we're looking at? Or is it that the distance between the top and the bottom is growing? It's certainly far bigger than it was in Orwell's day. Orwell was part of the movement that led to the delivery of Beveridge's 5 Giants in the welfare state. Have we somehow produced welfare dependency in a Frank Field sort of way, or have we now reached a generational poverty in which young people are, for the first time, going to be poorer? So I think I'll look to Stephen to start us off with his thoughts.
Thank you. Also, thank you very much to Letchworth. I came here a year ago when the original publisher, had gone bankrupt. And I turned up with a manuscript and said, I'm really sorry, there isn't necessarily going to be a book. But you were very generous, and we talked a lot, and we actually ended up in the final chapter of the experience when the publisher came in and rescued me. But I thought you were very kind not to walk out when I turned up and said, this is the manuscript I'm reading. So I'm really glad to come back and say I did actually do it. I did in the end. I think to address the questions specifically, one of the other people who was travelling at the same time as Orwell, not just writers, there was also Sir Rowntree, who is the guy who, if you like, defined the way that we measure poverty today. And he did so initially with a survey in New York at the beginning of the century, where he tried to work out what people needed to live. And he, at the time, it was quite controversial because he didn't just put down survival level rations, he put a certain level of social engagement. And he did a second survey in 1936, at the same time as Orwell was walking, and he did it again in New York, and measured the levels of poverty. And then in 1950, he did his final survey, and he died shortly afterwards. In 1950, he found that we effectively banished poverty. He couldn't find any trace of the poverty that he'd seen across the first half of the 20th century. He came to the conclusion that we had actually made poverty history. Now, what then happens if you look at measures of poverty is probably around about 1973, 1974, where at that point we got 3% unemployment, so it is largely full employment. Gradually, levels of unemployment rise, levels of poverty rise, and we're at a point now where the levels of poverty, when Orwell walked, poverty was really on its way down. The recession had peaked, and it was all starting to tip down. The line, if we follow it, led all the way down to 1950, poverty and unemployment on the wane. What we are now in a situation is where the opposite is happening, and levels of poverty in the UK are rising very fast. Levels of unemployment we know about, they're hovering, but the people who are getting jobs aren't getting proper jobs. What they're getting is part-time jobs, 0 hours contracts, temporary work with, when I went to Wigan, there are no coal mines, of course, anymore. And I went to Hitchin's food processing plant, which is what's really replaced coal mines in Wigan, is these giant food processing factories. Which again, you can't get a job directly with a factory, you have to go through an agency, you have to be interviewed, so you don't have a job, you can't be made redundant, you can't have sick pay because you don't work for anyone, you have a temporary contract with an agency and get paid the minimum wage to do not as dangerous work, without doubt. We have had health and safety improvements, widespread health and safety improvements, another great benefit. For when everyone says is health and safety gone mad, if you stand on a floor of a food processing plant and find people checking to see that you've got your earmuffs on so that you don't go deaf, you do realise that health and safety does have a purpose outside the page of the Daily Mail. So what we find is that those aren't really jobs. They're not jobs as anyone would have understood them. In Orwell's day, Orwell was dealing with a time of great casualisation, coal miners who would be working, sometimes paid by the bucket load. But the idea would be that the miners would come together and look after each other. There's the accounts in Road to Wigan here. He breaks down numbers where money's taken off coal miners to look after other miners when they fall sick or when they're injured. Again, something that's disappeared now. Workplace solidarity organisations, those sorts of things are largely absent from the North Island Sea, Northwest. So I would say that has the nature of poverty changed? Technically, yes, there was a massive change in what we think of as poverty. And now what we're doing is we're going back to that poverty of 1936. We're seeing the welfare reforms restructuring the welfare state around what was happening before, or regionalised committees establishing what's the correct amount of money to live on. We're seeing people being kicked off sickness and disability benefit.